Go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to welcome you all here to our second Men's Club speaker for the year. And I know many members wanted to be here today to hear Patty, and unfortunately they were not able to, but we have been looking forward to having you speak to us. And it's interesting, in our crowd here today, most of us have been in education. And what's interesting about it is I can't imagine today my having to, in the position I was in as a school head, trying to cope with the educating of young people today, all ages, with what we're going through. So my heart goes out to you, my profound respect for all you are doing. We are so fortunate. We are so fortunate to have you be watching over the Mashpee children and older children.
Thank you.
We've got to know Mashpee High School and middle and lower schools very well over the years. And one thing that I've said to Patty every time I've talked to her is what an outstanding staff and faculty you have. The commitment to the kids is so obvious. Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me here today. I know that some of you are watching sort of virtually. This is our new normal. We have people in front of us. We have people at home, kind of like our teachers are having to do this year. So I am Patty DeBoer. I'm the superintendent of Mashpee Public Schools. And this is a very unique year. And there are a lot of layers to what we have had to plan and implement for this year. And as my assistant superintendent, Dr. Hanscom, often says, it's like an onion. As you peel away each layer, you tend to cry more often than you expected because there's just a lot to it. But the first and foremost priority for us this whole school year is the health and wellness of our students and our staff. And when we closed last March 13th, Friday the 13th was when everybody went home. And we kept sort of in a planning mode of like, okay, in 2 weeks we're going to be back, 3 weeks we're going to be back. And so it was this sort of an unknown period from March through June that was an experience that is not at all like what we're having now. And so I think for families who went through the March through June, there were a lot of unknowns going into this year, wondering what remote learning was going to be like. The expectations from the March through June period were much lower than they are now, and it was sort of getting adjusted and hoping that things were going to get better. So that's where we landed at the end of the year. We were hopeful to have a graduation ceremony in person. So we delayed that, and by July 25th, we were able to accomplish that task outside, and that meant a lot to those class of 2020 seniors. And although they feel like they didn't get a normal experience as seniors, they really got 3/4 of sort of a normal senior year, and then they were having to adjust to that last quarter, unlike the class of 2021, who I think are going to be more significantly impacted by the change in how schooling is for their school year. So we did start to plan for school year 2021 into like May and June. We received a lot of guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in Massachusetts. And it was an ongoing, it's sort of an evolving, no one really knew all the answers. So you try to, and as educators, we like to plan ahead. We like to know everything that we need to do, dot all our I's and cross our T's, but we couldn't because you didn't know what you were planning for. So you would do little snippets of things and then wait for the next direction. And so there was definitely a focus on wanting to make sure we were able to reopen our schools. So that started with a lot of the safety measures, putting those in place, a lot of the planning. So you started becoming sort of the PPE hunters, and everyone was hunting, and people were not successful at finding what they thought they were going to need for the fall, and then you got more worried and you found other sources. So I want to give a lot of gratitude to the team in Mashpee that put together the plan for this year. So I was part of it, Assistant Superintendent Hanscom, our Director of Special Education, Dr. Curley, our 3 principals, which is Deborah Goulart at the Coombs School, Mary Kate O'Brien at Quashnet, and Mark Belstracci at the high school. We spent a lot of time together, socially distanced, masked, but working really hard to put together our plans. But then there were a lot of other people that supported. So we have Sean Maroney and Susie Brooks, who handled all the tech planning pieces. And then this year, Stacy Shackle is our nurse at the Coombs School, but she's also always been our district nurse coordinator, which was a stipended position. So towards the end of the summer, she was very involved, and she gives, more than double probably a workload of a week in just how she is. So anyway, we made her a full-time district nurse coordinator for this year and hired a substitute nurse for Coombs, and that allows Stacy to she took on then really monitoring all the PPE that we needed to order and that it was coming in. She monitored all the DESE health and safety requirements. She works with the Board of Health, the state level group of nurses. So she put a lot of pieces together like that, and I really appreciate having her now in that role as we start to sort of process when someone thinks they might have symptoms. So there's a lot of layers that she's monitoring. So it's really been a huge team approach to get this year off the ground. And like Bob was saying, our teachers, we just had a health advisory meeting this morning, and I said in that meeting, one of my biggest concerns is for our faculty and our staff, because they have their worries about wellness. They have their own family obligations and things going on in your life, but they're also teaching in an environment that for the most part they never planned for. They're grieving the loss of what a traditional school year meant to them and what that classroom was like. And they're balancing students sitting in front of them, students on a Zoom screen. There's just a lot of layers for them, and I worry that, as some of them might reach a breaking point, because what we did in the summer was we provided some training through Modern Teacher, which the administrators all participated in well, and it helped teachers to sort of build what we call blended learning. And what that is it allows you to create sort of a playlist or lessons that are much more visual. So your students sitting in front of you can see them. The students sitting at home can see them. You build into that sort of explicit instruction blocks as well, but it's really a new concept for them. So about 65 teachers participated in the summer training. And then when the Department of Ed said, we're giving you 10 days of training for this school year for your staff. So at the beginning of the year, instead of it being 180 days for students, this year is only 170. But those 10 days were meant to provide training for teachers. So our teachers spent a lot of time working through this Modern Teacher, creating these playlists and getting ready, which I think set them up for a really good span, but I fear that now they need a little more time to sort of gear up for the next month. I think they have to get a new rhythm going. And I often speak to them, and we do praise them a lot, but sometimes I think they get too much, they don't necessarily feel that the praise is genuine, which it absolutely is. And I try to go in classrooms and understand how hard it is for them, but it doesn't change the fact that they're still going through what they're struggling to do. So we need to find ways to take a few things off of their plates, but they are really doing a phenomenal job. And I tell them that, not using just, extra adjectives, but when I go in the classrooms and I look at the students that are engaged there, and then I see the kids that are on the screen, they are all engaged. They are having quality learning experiences. And so what I've said to teachers is we're all perfectionists in education generally. And so when something doesn't go right, they take it personally. And so, we've had some tech glitches, but when you plan and you rely on that technology now and something doesn't go exactly right, then it becomes sort of too much owned on their shoulders, and we have to try to take that off. But for the most part, we've been pretty fortunate. I knock on wood every morning about how things have gone. So we have a great tech team, so the technology has gone very well. There's a lot of online resources we use, and you have to upload student lists and rosters, and all of that was a little bit of a delay. But within the classroom, they have the technology we need. We got, I think most teachers now have a microphone system that allows their voice to be heard in a more clearer way, not only for those at home, but those in the class, because everybody is staying masked. And we've also, for our HVAC systems, they've turned the ventilation systems up to 100% flow of fresh air, which makes the blowers louder. So they're having to sort of deal with that kind of environment. But in all of the classrooms, we have, not all the classrooms, in pre-K to grade 3, they're 100% in person, unless a family chose to be remote. If they chose to be remote, that's fine. And so that student who's remote at those grade levels has a seat in that classroom that just is vacant for them. So if they choose to come back, they're associated with that class. We do not have any remote-only teachers. Other districts did it in various ways, and we did have a goal on the Cape. We meet all the time as the Cape superintendents to try to be as unified as we could, but in the end, we can't because our buildings are different, our sizes are different, everything is so different, our unions are different. So we tried for the most part with that goal, but it didn't end up that way. But in our buildings, at the Coombs School, we measured, and they are able to accommodate 12 desks in a classroom. So that's the maximum size that you can have. And so every teacher has a few remote learners, fewer at those grade levels. So you might have 2. And so you might have 11 students in front, or 10 students in front of you, and 2 that are, remote. It's hard to do remote when you're little people. I mean, you cannot be doing that at home without an adult to support you. It's not like as you get older. So, but we like our model because it does allow for families to change their mind and come in. And that's kind of our goal, is convincing families. There was a lot of apprehension, I know, before school started. One of the things we did for 3rd graders, we had these tours, and they were set up by appointments, and they were in the evening, and so families would come, mom and dad and the child, and we would go through and show them where their room was and all that. And it was kind of a goal after each tour to say, yeah, I turned that one, they want to come in person now, because people would come whether they were in person or remote learners. And I know that some have medical issues, so that's a different subject, but if we can work through the apprehension of having your child in person in school, that's a great thing, because that's where we really want all of our kids to be. And then for 4th through 12th, we had to go hybrid, and that has to do with the spacing. So the high school classrooms could only accommodate 10 desks to be 6, and we went with the 6-foot distancing. DESE said we could be 3 to 6 feet, but we did not want to go any lower than what the 6-foot was. So when you have 10 students in a class, but you might normally have 17 kids in English 1, you can't have them all together at the same time. So we knew we had to go hybrid for 7 through 12. We were hoping not to do hybrid for 4 through 6, but once the busing requirement came in, which was 23 students maximum, diagonal seating, you can have a sibling sit together, that just created a whole nother layer of this onion, and we weren't able to have everyone on the buses unless we were going to purchase more buses and more drivers, which is hard to get. We don't have enough. We have enough now, but it's hard to get them. So then we put out the call to any family that wanted to help us out by driving their child, and they all came. I really have to say the families have been such an important member of our partnership. So many families said, yes, we'll drive our kids, which made it so then we could fit everybody on buses. And so 4, 5, and 6 at the Quashnet School are also hybrid. Her capacity, I believe, is 14 desks in a classroom. But in any day I go in, there's probably about 8 kids in the classroom. And then everything in the classrooms got emptied out. So we have 10 storage containers on our campuses that are chocked full, nothing else can fit in them, of things we took out of the classrooms. So in some cases, I'm hoping some of that never makes its way back into the classrooms, because I really like the way the classrooms are. And we do tend to collect things as teachers. And so we created sort of short-term storage areas where teachers can go and access some of their things, and then long-term. And if it made it into the storage container, you don't get it back until the end of the year, if then. But anyway, so all the classrooms are much more sparse in terms of furnishings, but clearly there are full walk areas for the students. The students do wear their masks in school, but they are given multiple breaks throughout the day. At the lower schools, when they eat a snack, they know that they have to stay in their seat, eat their snack, not really talk to people, but they don't, obviously they don't have their masks on, and there are breaks at the high school levels as well. One of the changes, so all the hallways are taped, sort of there's a middle zone that you don't go into, but you can walk different directions. And then we have the 6-foot distancing, we call them discs, they're attached. The hand sanitizer is outside every classroom. There's hand sanitizer in common areas. I have to give a shout out to DPW as well. They did so much work for us this summer above and beyond the normal cleaning. They moved all that furniture. If you had seen it before they put it into the storage containers in the gymnasium at the Quashnet School, was just stacked with like trapezoid tables and extra desks and just a tremendous amount of furniture. And then they had to help us also arrange the desks, and they had measurements, and we put dots down so that the desks stay where they're supposed to be. But they just sort of like we did sometimes feel like we were spinning our wheels and not making progress. They did as well, because we were like, no, we got to get in here, we got to get this stuff organized, tagged. Some stuff got moved back. It was a lot of fluidity to that partnership, but they've been really great helping us to mark the hallways as well. For lunches at all the schools, they have to sit 6 feet apart. So the elementary schools, all the schools have 2 eating zones, the cafeteria, and then they use some of their gymnasium, half of the gym at all 3 schools. They generally have individual desks in these locations that have been positioned. The high school only uses desks, and they alternate between, so there's 4 lunches up there. The first one may eat in the gym. When they're done, there's a whole cleaning and sanitation process that takes place, and then that one is left alone for the next, and the next lunch is in the cafeteria space. And then it alternates back to the gym, and that allows for the disinfecting and the in-between time. I think it's 15 minutes dry time for both places. At the other schools, they also do that same process. They alternate between their spaces. They do use long tables at the elementary with a child at each end of the long tables. Those are the ones they already had. But one of the things I found going through all the lunches, and the administrators cover all the lunch duties because we didn't want to expose any teachers who were nervous about being around kids without their masks. So we said, okay, we're not making that a responsibility for teachers. The administrators are doing it. But the kids have all been able to pick their spot, but then you have to stay in that spot when you eat your lunch every day. So the high school, you picked the desk, you surrounded yourself with friends. They are far enough apart, but they do talk during lunch, and they all have their phones, so they do whatever they do. But one of the things I found with lunches, particularly at the middle high school, is from an equity perspective, it kind of leveled the playing field, because lunches for middle high school students can be stressful, particularly if you're not, at the popular table, or you're trying to figure out where you fit in. Everybody fits in exactly the same as everyone else. You all have your independent table, it's a good sized square desk. Nobody's like grabbing at food, which generally when you eat as a group of high schoolers, there's a lot of that goes on. And the administrators are able to sort of weave through. The trash is done through a trash can on wheels, so it's very sort of centering. One of the administrators said, I really view it as a time when kids get to sort of relax, recenter themselves. You can talk if you want, or you can do whatever else you're doing when you're eating there as well. So what we're finding too as we go through this school year, there will be things that we like. The change resulted in us thinking outside the box in a different way, and we might keep some of those practices. And then other things we're greatly missing. I was saying to Bill about what makes a school so full and rich is everything about the school. It's not just the learning in the classrooms, and we're really missing those other layers of that create that full experience. So it's the night events, it's the open houses, it's induction ceremonies, it's being able to attend. We are running our fall sports, but we're not, the spectators is very limited. And so it's not like you can just go hang out and watch a game or anything like that. So there's just a lot of layers. I know for teachers, one of the things we were talking about last week is how isolated it can be. And teaching generally can be an isolating career because you're in your classroom, you have your kids, you interact with those around you, but it's not exactly like being in an office space where you have coworkers. But this year, where they can eat together, but they're not really eating together because you got to space yourself. And there's just a whole layer of sort of being on guard and wanting to be extra safe that is creating more of an isolation. I mean, we do a lot of Zoom meetings and we interact that way, but it's just not the same as, so that loss of that human connection among colleagues is something that we're trying to figure out ways to make sure that we protect and support our teachers. But the curriculum that the teachers are following through on is just like they would normally. They're making sure they cover all the standards. They're working together. We've told them to collaborate, and if, on a grade level, you could decide, I'm going to create the math lessons, I'm going to create, you create the reading lessons so that they're spreading out the work a little bit. That was something they did at the spring. What we also did this year was create a district landing page, which everyone can access from our website, and it allows one place to go as a family member, as a student. So you land there, you click on your school. From there, you can click on your teacher or teachers if you have multiple courses, and everything you need for it to guide your learning is on that teacher's landing page. So that was something that they learned about in the summer as well as in those first 10 days of the school year. But really emphasizing, again, the one glitch we're currently or still having is, so everybody did a great job offering to drive their students to and from school. But that has created a slightly nightmarish parking and road issue. We call it the snake because it's very windy and weaving through. So what we did after that first week is we then reassessed buses and sort of let them know that if you are interested in moving your child back to bus transportation, because maybe they were just doing it to help us out and they didn't have a fear of their child being on the bus. So those have come through, and I think we've been able to place about 70 more kids on buses, which shortens the snake a little bit, but it's still, you don't want to be near Coombs or Quashnet near arrival or dismissal. It's a little bit of it goes quicker. We've gotten dismissals down to 10 minutes of the snake, but it's an interesting piece. The hybrid model that we ended up creating for grades 4 through 12. So we have a Mashpee cohort and we have a Falcons cohort. And when we initially sat down to do this, and it was the administrative team, we decided to cohort by buses, and not by areas of town, but just seeing, we started at the middle high school. So with the idea that certain buses, they would run during the Mashpee week, and then the other buses would run during the Falcon week. But if you needed support based on the numbers, you could have a bus trail. And so you could have two buses do the same route in a week and alternating. So right now, we don't have all of our buses run in both weeks at the middle high school. They do for elementary. So what we did is we looked at the bus routes and the number of kids who rode them and the areas they came from. And then we just started to just say, okay, bus 10, let's put them in the Mashpee week, and going like that. Then we reassessed the numbers at the end and accounted for every child and made sure it matched with our Power School data. And then we started to look to make sure it was balanced between males and females, socioeconomic, whether kids needed IEP supports, all of those different things. And surprisingly, it came out relatively smooth the first time through. But then we had to, and then once that was set, we then had to go back to the high school schedule, which I give kudos to Lindsay Catt and her team. She had already placed kids into their courses based on what they picked. Now we've cohorted, and so once you do that, you then have to look to make sure there's not more than 10 kids in either cohort in these courses, because you can't seat more than 10 in a classroom. So there was a lot of maneuvering around and adding sections and figuring out, which that's her area of expertise. I can only imagine what it was like. I saw them many days up in the library at the high school, checking lists, moving kids, because you literally can't have more than 10 kids. And if you So we sorted, she was able to make that work, which was great. And then we knew we had to sort our 4th, 5th, and 6th graders by families. So all families are in the same cohort. So you wouldn't have kids, alternating between a Falcon or a Mashpee. But then for grades 4, 5, and 6, they had to match up as well, so that we tried to keep all families in school or remote matching that up. So that worked. We worked through that. And we have about, last I checked, we have about 1,500 students this year in our district, and we had, that was a couple weeks ago, about 277 were remote only. So close to about 20%, I'd say, right? 300. Anyway, those students have are slowly choosing to become, like if you're in grades 4 through 12 and you chose 100% remote, you can choose to become hybrid, which means you come in one week and you learn the second week. We've had more, I think we have about 36 families who chose, or students who chose to be homeschooled, which when that happens, they totally sort of disenroll from Mashpee Public Schools, which means they're not in our numbers count, and they have to have their curriculum approved. But then once that approval happens, then that's it. They're separate from us. But that could have an impact down the road with state monies. But yes.
Could you tell us about how you're dealing with fevers and illnesses and
testing? So we are not doing any mass testing. What we do now is, we have an expectation that every student self-assesses in the morning, or the families do. We've given them the guideline sheet. We don't collect that or anything, but I say put it on your fridge. You need to go down the list. If you have any symptoms like that, just stay home. And what's nice is you can stay home and be a remote learner that day, and we take attendance. So when they take attendance, you have to zoom into every classroom and follow and participate, but you can be remote present or regular present. So it's allowed for that. A sick day doesn't necessarily mean a sick day anymore for kids. We want you to stay home, just engage with your classes at home if you're well enough, and that day will count for you. So the students are doing that sort of self-attestation every day. Staff does it as well. And most of what I've seen, and a lot of it feeds to our nurse coordinator, is staff will say, I've got like a scratchy throat, or I've got something. And so we do all go immediately to COVID. That's regardless of the fact that there are other illnesses out there around now. But when they do that, what we do is they let us know. They go to their primary care physician. And depending on the guidelines that physician has given them, in most cases so far, it's been that they have to be tested. They stay out until they get the results of that test. Everyone so far has come back negative who's had concerns, but they've had obviously something else. And through the federal government, every staff member gets 10, it's FFCRA sick days. So they don't have to use their own sick days. That's through December 31st. So in this case, when a teacher went home on a Monday because she had a couple symptoms, and she didn't return till the following Monday, but those 5 days were not taken out of her own accrual of sick leave. Those are covered under that. I mean, we cover it, but they're not charged. So we know, so far so good, but we know that we'll end up probably with a positive case at some point. And what happens is some of the teachers have been around someone who has been sent to be tested. So if that person gets, the person they were around comes back negative, and they have a negative test, they're fine to come back. If you've been around someone who was tested positive, even if your test comes back negative, you have to quarantine. But so far, we're doing well. And I'm just hopeful that between mask wearing, 6-foot social distancing, and the hand washing that we have in place, that we can withstand sort of, not status quo, but we put all of these things in place for a reason, to give us some extra layers of protection. So I'm hoping that will have an impact on our ability to keep students and staff in school learning.
So at this point in time, you've had no COVID-19 cases?
Right.
That's remarkable.
Right, because this is, I think, let's see, we started September 16th, so whatever, I've lost track, but yeah, so one day at a time.
That's great. And
Yeah.
that's a tribute to you and to all your staff members. And I worry about students. I have 5 grandkids, and what I worry about is the academic loss that they have encountered since
Right.
March and
Right.
then into the year. So
Yeah.
it'll be very interesting to see how the kids' scores and all match up, say in June or whatever the time would be.
Right.
Are we experiencing a loss of academic abilities and so on during that time? And you said to me you've got the bases covered, but still, to me, it's a worry, that's all.
Oh, it is a worry, and I know that teachers have seen that students, return to school this year sort of not where they felt that they should be. But the thing, this is sort of obviously it's a pandemic, and so every student has probably had not the growth that they should have had. And so it's our job to make sure we can help them grow as much as they can. Globally, I think every student is probably experiencing this. I really value having the students in school. We talked about how, all summer long we're doing all the planning. Once the teachers were physically back for those 10 days and they were in their classrooms, it started to feel a little bit more normal, and then having the kids come back. And I just think even it's this knowing that there are other human beings sort of nearby. It's a different dynamic for kids. And they laugh at recess, they're wearing their masks, they're running around. I think the mask piece which was such a concern to a lot of parents, it's because we're filtering ourselves in and we're like feeling bad that they have to have this experience as children. But for the most part, the kids, we've had no discipline issues, nobody refusing to wear their masks. They all are very compliant, and we're very grateful for that. And we also spoke that if we had come back to school in May and sort of tried to have everyone mask, that would not have been effective because no one was at the right point to sort of welcome or, choose to wear the mask.
I guess that really does reflect, though, the support of the community. That
Yes.
the kids are that conformant to the rules.
I think we've created a culture in Mashpee. Our kids, we've had outside consultants come in and they'll be like, your kids are so compliant. And because they may not like what they're doing, I'm not guaranteeing that every learning experience has been phenomenal for every student, and there's been negative experiences, I'm sure, but they generally handle it in a very calm way. And so you see kids, the classrooms have always been very sort of settled and calm. The hallways are all, there's never any worries about things that are going to go on in the hallways at Mashpee Middle High School. Now, granted, we only have half of our kids there on any given day this year, but even when we're fully loaded, they always seem to be very aware of each other and taking care of each other. And so the fact that I think they all, initially, when we were first out in March, it was probably thought to be okay with, the kids were like, but then even all of our 7th through 12th, they didn't like it anymore. They wanted to be back in. So I think going through what we did got us to where we are today in terms of everybody being a little bit more appreciative and hopeful for that normality of school, I think.
A lot of the special needs kids were, I think, from what I've read, particularly hit hard
Right.
by being out with remote learning,
Right.
and because their needs weren't really being addressed. How is that going for this year?
Right. So in the summer, we were able to offer programming, in-person programming, and more supports for students who have learning challenges. But when we set up our cohorts, we gave special attention to students, the needs of certain students, and some kids are in full time. So you're part of both cohorts, because they were identified as students that it was really harmful, or there's not a support system to help them in that remote learning piece. So we have them in every day, and there's a range of kids within that category.
Did we get some financial assistance from the state and federal governments? There must be a whole lot of additional expenses that you've encountered as a result of all the steps you've had to take to make the Mashpee schools as safe as possible to all concerned.
Right. So we're very grateful for working with the town of Mashpee. Town manager Rodney Collins and Don Thayer, they they have a pool of COVID money. And I believe theirs was like $1,250,000, but you have to justify the expenditure of it. And so a lot of what we expended from March through June, so as we were purchasing PPE, we continued to provide meals for any family that needed it. And initially it was like an everyday thing, but then we kind of got a little bit more a better system, and we did it once a week where you picked up 5 breakfasts and 5 lunches. And I will kudos again to the admin team. We went every Monday and did all the loading of the bags. So all of the expenses related to that were part of the money that went into the first batch. We have since written, we have about $165,000 grant that, I think that might be a state one, but that one was for the tents that we purchased and also for monitors for the buses. Then there's another one that we wrote for that's about $360,000, or that was a lot of PPE technology and some personnel. The problem with those grants, not the 165, but the other one, and the town grants, because they still have money left in theirs, is they end on December 30th, a very weird date, not even the 31st, but they end. And so the problem will be, and we are closely monitoring, we have additional personnel. We had to hire additional teachers at Coombs in order to have class sizes of 12. And so we have that January through June expense to figure out what we're going to do with. But that's something we're collaborating with the town on. So yes, we do keep track of all of the sort of COVID-related expenses.
I'm sure you do, yes.
And hopefully, there'll be a resource for those that we will be able to access, because it is what it is. We had to do it. But yeah.
Patty, with all of the wonderful classrooms, the 3D imaging,
Yeah.
things like that, the robotics, all of those labs where the students are just so engaged. How have you managed to be able to keep doing that, or have they had to be put aside because of the cleaning need and things like that?
No, they still participate. We still have all those classes. One student, when I was talking to him at lunch, I said, well, do you like your remote, this was at the high school, your remote week or your in-person week? And he goes, well, I like in-person better because I don't like the wood shop remotely or PE remotely. And I said, well, what do you do in wood shop remotely? And so they do all these 3D modeling through computer programs, but it's not the hands-on piece. And I know with the robotics, we've provided some supplies at home for kids, but it's still that piece. I think it's the hardest for 100% remote learners, because we cannot duplicate everything that we can do in the classroom. And so if you're a hybrid, you're going to get it when you come in there physically, but if you're never there physically, it's kind of hard for us to replicate that experience. I know some of our like AP art students were excited the first week because they were there for their in-person, but for their remote weeks, it was like Christmas to them. They got this bag of wonderful supplies that artists love their supplies, so it was really nice for them. They were very excited to have those supplies. Yes?
I have a granddaughter in Colorado and a grandson in New Jersey who are seniors. You don't go visiting the colleges anymore. I guess it's all remote. But how are you preparing the kids who are seniors to go to the next step next year?
Well, I have to give kudos again to Lindsay Ketch. She works very closely with all of our seniors, and I know she started, I don't know if you follow her on Twitter, but she posts out every time a student has completed their college application. So I think the colleges have become pretty creative with some of the virtual tours that they've created. I think you can still have visits to college. You wouldn't be part of a group, but that smaller scale opportunity, particularly, I would hope, you narrow it down to a couple, maybe not going to 10 different colleges, but I think they've still set up ways to do that. I know we're not really, thinking about what colleges are doing, we're not having volunteers in our buildings right now, but hopefully that will evolve down the road, because parents don't even come in the buildings anymore right now, but everybody's getting used to sort of it, but we like maybe it's somewhat of a false sense, but we like feeling like we're keeping ourselves safer than otherwise, even though we realize, when it's not school time, families are together and friends are together, and, I don't know how the long weekend will impact us that we just went through, but I remind families all the time about just, being careful and using good sense because we really need that community approach in order to keep Mashpee schools functioning the way they are. And even if Mashpee were to, Mashpee, the community, see some type of a spike in number of COVID cases, I still want to say, like, I need to dive into that data, because is it at certain sort of assisted living facilities or in retirement communities or places that maybe we're able to sort of isolate ourselves more, or is it something that our families have been exposed to? Who knows? But we'll have to look at that a little bit closely when we hit that point.
The new facilities you have received from relating to health careers,
Yes.
like EMTs and
Yeah.
stuff like that. How is that going, implementing a new program while you're in the middle of all of this?
Right, so we have all the equipment in that room is set up, but we're not implementing right now because we can't get that program off the ground in the current situation. But we're doing all sort of really good deep planning so that when it does kick off, we're ready to go. But unfortunately, that is not something that we're
That's not
able to do right now. I know.
And I was a superintendent of schools for many, many years, and there were days when I'd say to myself, oh, woe is me, I hate to go to work today. Do I have to go to work today? Stop the world, I want to get off. But when I consider what you just are describing today, and please don't give me a quiz after. I'd have a little trouble following, but in terms of what you're doing, what you've done, my work was like child's play in comparison to what the issues that you're facing today, and the way you're facing them. The fact I subscribe to the Cape Cod Times and other papers, and we don't read about complaints about the Mashpee schools. Many other schools, complaints and so on. It's a great tribute to you, your staff, teachers, students, and also for the parents who have been so wonderful throughout this whole process.
Yeah, I have to say, and it is a hard time, and luckily I think I'm surrounded by a great team of leaders, and even all of our teachers are also leaders, and we all sort of have that shared goal. And the association, the union in Mashpee, I've worked with Mary Stickley, the union president, throughout. We used to meet weekly. You got to get this MOA in place, but it's been very collaborative and reasonable, and I felt that there was some other districts would say, I'm going into my 70th hour of negotiating an MOA. I'm like, oh my goodness, while you have to then go back and do your mile-long to-do list, and the association can go read a book on the beach in the summer, but we really worked closely together, and I think we had ours done in under 20 hours, so total. But I just really, I have not received hate mail, so please don't send me any, but anyway, for the most part, our families and even our principals, so the families have really been tolerant, patient, flexible, grateful. The initial clog of the roads that's gotten a lot better still can get aggravating for people. And we know, and everybody's also sort of, their little cup inside could be tipping over because they have a lot going on in their own lives. But they've been respectful, and I feel like that's helped sort of model for our kids what we want for them, and that what we can make this year. We can make this year to be a really great year. It's going to be a different year, but there are some things that will be much better. And I just want kids to get that message too, because if you're in 5th grade, you only get 1 year in 5th grade, and you want it to be the best that it can be. It'll be different, but it doesn't mean it can't be great.
One of the things that I think you bring to this situation in Mashpee is you're a great communicator, both through the written word and when you speak to us. I mean, I look at the letters you send, your monthly things, your weekly, you're putting it out there, which I think is extraordinary.
Well, and I want to make sure everybody knows we're going to be as transparent as possible. So when we do get that first positive COVID case, everyone's going to know about it. You're not going to necessarily know where. And then specific to whoever needs to be contact traced, and they get a different phone call. But we do want to make sure, I think one of my last Friday emails prompted a parent to say, so you were telling me there's no positive cases in the Mashpee schools. I said, yes, there's no positive cases. I will let you know. But I think it really is important to sort of allay everybody's you know, I use this term in another setting about catastrophizing. I kind of tell my husband he does that all the time, but it's where you sort of go to that worst case scenario when you're dealing with this, and that's not a great place to go. And why do we do that instead of thinking what's the best thing that could happen out of this instead of what's the worst thing that can happen? So that's what sort of my mindset is. And, you know, it's every day is different, that's for sure. You never know what's going to land on your plate.
One last final thought with you, which you can help us with, is, because I know we are coming toward the end of the time, one of the most fun events of the Mashpee Men's Club each year is the high fives.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the whole paradigm for that will change
Mm-hmm.
from what it was. Do you think, is it wise for us to somehow have the school, Lindsay and all of you, we recognize the high fives in December somehow by a,
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I could see, do you think it's appropriate this year, or do you think we should sit it out?
I think there's a way to make it happen. So part of me was thinking, so in our auditorium at the high school, your membership could be very socially distanced, and so could the 8 to 10 students that you hear from in terms of sharing. They could also, if we didn't do something like that, each of the candidates or the individuals that we wanted to bring to you, we could have them sort of video their piece as if they were sitting at that table at the senior center sharing their ideas and thoughts. There could also be an opportunity where those not as good, we could do some type of a Zoom where at least you could, because you need that question opportunity. I love when you ask the questions of the kids. So that type of thing, but that could work in the auditorium as well. That you know, I think it holds 700, and we can spread you out and make sure you're all 6, 6, 6, and 6, and the kids are spread out.
Bruce,
So do I.
we should talk about.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
And Patty will work with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Work with us,
Yeah, I would hate to see that
We can
sort of
make that happen.
tradition not
We will make that-
happen.
Let's be positive. We will make that happen.
That's
We can
right.
make it happen.
That's right. We can make that happen. Yeah. I appreciate the support that this greater Mashpee community, the Men's Club, always gives the Mashpee Public Schools. I feel very, you know, I always say we're a connected community, but it truly, we try to live that. It's not just a sort of a tagline. And I think, you know, this year we're going to feel a little bit less connected than we normally do, but we're knowing that you're sort of out there and ready to support, and then whatever we can do to get little tethers of connection, we'll do. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you. Thanks. All right.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, Bill, thank
Yes.